Costas, it's good to see you again.
Matteo, always a pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm happy we are resurfacing a conversation we both care about. We both came across this article in the Harvard Business Review. The article will link to it, but it's called "Is Your Leadership Style Too Nice?" And the second we saw it, we both pretty much reached out to each other and thought, well, this is a good excuse to revisit the conversation that we've had maybe last year or something like that.
Similar, right? We talked about kindness, which I'm sure we're going to discuss in a moment, but yes.
Yes, yes. And look, it's a topic we both care about very much, but at the same time, maybe you'll agree, it is also maybe a confusing matter for some people. We were just discussing this prior to the recording. Let me open the conversation with a blunt question. Um, what do you think we mean by nice, kind? Are these terms interchangeable?
Sure. I don't think they're interchangeable, first of all. But let me ask you a question first, because when I was at school, and I think many people, at least in the UK, will appreciate this, your English teacher would tell you never to use the word nice, because nice in itself doesn't really mean anything specific. So given that you're an Italian based in Berlin, Matteo, what are the equivalents in Italian or German of the word nice? Does it have one equivalent or is it confused?
So I will not venture to say anything in German because I'm probably not the right person for that. But nice in Italian, I would say it very much depends on the context. So there's different words that somehow match with nice in English. So for Italian people listening or Italian speakers, that would be maybe carino, piacevole, grazioso. So there's a few terms that I would link with nice.
Okay. So by definition, it depends on the context or it depends on the circumstances of what you're trying to convey. Yeah. By using the word nice. So already this article, is your leadership style too nice? Begs a lot of questions. What do we mean by that? And I think generally speaking, despite what I said about English teachers, I think that nice and kind are very different. So I would suggest to you that nice, broadly speaking, means sort of polite, pleasant, uh, with manners, non-confrontational. Let's stop there for a moment. Kind actually is about being caring. It's about empathy, generosity, moral integrity. So I think there are differences. One simple way to sort of distinguish them before we get into the meat of this is that nice actually reflects how you behave. If somebody says, Matteo, he seems to be a nice guy, yeah, the sense you will get is Matteo is pretty easy to talk to, polite, non-confrontational, doesn't rock the boat, right? Um, kind actually is about why you behave in the way you behave. Yeah, so nice is how you seem, and kind is actually why you do it. You do it because you care, you're empathetic, or you value other people. So I do think they're different. At the same time, I do think kindness is important for leadership. I don't think niceness is.
Hmm. I'll need you to elaborate on that because I have a bit of a. I'm slowly forming an opinion as we go, and I say that because to me, in all honesty, the difference between kind and nice has not always been crystal clear for the reasons that we've discussed, right? And sometimes when I read around, these terms are almost used interchangeably, or maybe that's the way I interpret it. But one thing for sure I know that when people refer to leadership as being too kind or too nice, that usually gets a negative connotation, which I get. But the distinction between kind and nice has not always been crystal clear to me. So I'll need you to elaborate a little bit on why do you think kind is the way to go? Why do you think nice doesn't really match with the idea of leadership?
Sure, that's a good question. I think nice suggests this is the implication. You hear the word nice, he's a nice guy. If you're talking about a boss or a colleague or a leader, the chances are you're simply saying that they're always kind of agreeable, right, in meetings. They don't give difficult feedback. they don't suggest there's an issue where they may feel uncomfortable with something. They sort of let things, be, right? Without creating any sort of destabilizing effects. The problem with that, which is obvious, and I think the article that we both read kind of alludes to it, right, is it means by definition that problems are not really addressed. Standards in the organization slip. There's another risk, actually, which is an interesting risk, and I'll talk to you about it in the context of Hogan assessment. We've talked a bit before about some psychometric tests that leaders find useful, and I'm a practitioner in the Hogan assessment. And one of the derailers, I think, i.e., one of the areas that make leaders less effective under pressure, is this concept of being leisurely, okay? Leisurely in Hogan. Now, leisurely in Hogan terms means that you don't, under pressure, create confrontation. You sort of, acquiesce. You say, absolutely. But in your mind, you're thinking, that is nonsense. That is actually a terrible decision. That is unacceptable behavior. But you're being nice on the surface. If you think about what that is, that's kind of bordering on passive aggressive behavior. Yeah. You're not addressing the discomfort. You're not addressing the issue. You're being ostensibly nice about it. But then in your own mind, and maybe to those you trust, yeah, you display what you really think. You explain how you really feel about the behavior or the decision. And that over time doesn't create leadership, right? Because people recognize that you're not prepared to confront or to address difficult situations. And that has a knock on effect on the organization's success.
Look, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we can all agree that as a leader, you do have some responsibilities towards your team, towards the company, towards yourself, of course. And there's a reason why you're in that role. There's a reason why people look up to you as a leader, right? So if you are leisurely, if you're everybody's friend, that might not necessarily be the best approach to lead a team and guide them towards a target, a goal, or through tough times. And there's no question about that. What I sometimes feel, and this is a very personal take, I believe, is that a lot of times when I do a little bit of research or I hear people talk about leadership, modern leadership, and what is really sustainable in the long term, conversations often become very limiting, I don't want to say divisive, but somehow very black and white. So we say, well, kindness and leadership definitely match together, but be careful not to be too kind. You want to be kind, you don't necessarily want to be nice. So there is always a be this, don't be that, right? I understand the reasoning behind it, but my take is, of course, you want a lead who is clear on goals and objectives, who is able to have tough conversations, because if a lead tiptoes around me and is not able to give me proper feedback, I will never grow. So inadvertently, they will damage my own growth, my career potential. That is perfectly clear. But why cannot we have a lead who is kind and nice? Why can I not have a tough conversation, but also at the same time have someone who walks to my desk and says, hey, I saw you doing this. You did a great job. I would encourage you to do more of that in the future. Or how are you doing? Or should we grab a coffee? And I don't necessarily need a hug every 5 minutes. We don't need to have 5 coffees a day.
Sure.
But I think the two things can go together. And I do believe that it's a bit of an inheritance from the past to think that leaders cannot be both, right? There's no weakness to me in being nice. I don't want people to walk all over me just because I'm nice, and I understand that there's a danger of that. But I do think that being nice and kind can go together. Am I too naive in thinking that?
Not at all. Not at all, Matteo. I love the way you think. And I agree with you, right? And I know the leaders that I followed in my career have been a combination of those things, but they haven't been too nice. What I'm going to suggest to you is that they have shown their humanity, that they have seen you as a human being first, and as an employee, a colleague, or a junior subordinate second. And that's the important thing. So I think we talked about it a year ago, but let me remind you of this level of leadership that John C. Maxwell once presented, which I think really speaks to what you just said. And he talks about 5 layers of leadership. There are 5 reasons why people follow leaders. The most basic level is because they need to, right? They have a job. They need to have a job. The second level is because they like you. So already being nice, being liked, is only at the second level of leadership, according to John C. Maxwell. And I agree with him, right? So it's good, but it's not enough, right? The third layer of leadership is people follow you because you deliver. Actually, you're good at what you do. So again, let's think about what being nice is. It suggests that you're pleasant, but you may or may not be good at what you do. So you need to be good at what you do. Okay, that's the third layer of leadership. But the fourth and fifth layer, Matteo, address what you just said. The fourth layer is people follow you because you help them grow. Your words, yeah? If you're too nice, you don't give feedback, or you don't give it effectively, or you don't, or you allow standards to drop, or you're inconsistent, right, in how you apply those standards. That means you don't actually help people grow. So that's the fourth layer of leadership. And the fifth layer is where humanity comes in. The top layer of leadership, according to John C. Maxwell, is that people follow you because of who you are and what you stand for. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means being treated with respect as a human being, even in tough times, even when the situation is pressurized, and so on and so forth. So I will never forget my first week in investment banking 5 years ago. I think I went home at 5 a.m. every day for 4 days in a row because we had a meeting with a very important client on the Friday of that week. And I was thinking to myself, I cannot believe this so-and-so managing director who has basically kicked our butts for the last 5 days to deliver this presentation. Does it really have to be this way? Again, he wasn't unpleasant, but he was demanding, right? And I worked for 4 or 5 days and didn't sleep. And on the Friday, half asleep, I go into my cubicle because I was a junior guy at that point, and the senior guy and his team, senior guys, went to the meeting. He comes back from the meeting. He puts his hand on my shoulder. I'll never forget him. His name is Noam Cohen. And he said, Costas, do you want to go to see the US Open quarterfinals? I said, oh my God, I'd love to. He goes, yeah, Gabriella Sabatini is playing. You'll appreciate this. I think she was an Italian former tennis player and quite an attractive young person. So I was very excited to be offered the chance to go to the US Open to watch Gabriella Sabatini, right? After 5 days of not sleeping, we go to the quarterfinals with Noam and a couple of his clients, and I'm asleep after about 4 minutes when the score is 2-1, right? And I get woken up by him at the end of the match. So I barely watched the match. But you know what? He showed me who he was and what he stood for. He showed his humanity despite the pressures. So you can be both.
I like the reference, and I'd like to think that your lead back then was maybe a bit of a combination, and maybe I'm still struggling with the idea of like kind and nice and completely separating them. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. Can I ask you a personal question, Costas? What kind of lead were you? Were you a kind lead?
I think I was. It's interesting. I have stayed in touch with many of the juniors who reported to me when I was a senior banker. And one of them did say that perhaps I was too kind with one of the more difficult mid-level bankers, so who created a lot of kind of collateral damage because of the behavior. I don't think I was, but I think they realized, this is the point, they realized I wasn't nice. Yeah? That I didn't just say pleasant, I didn't just say, listen, this person is difficult, yeah? And therefore they should leave, or you're absolutely right to complain. I said, this person can be difficult. You have to learn how to work with them more effectively. I will give them feedback, but they're also very smart and very capable, and we have to find a way to work together. So that's not being nice, because being nice is sort of just appeasing, just saying, yeah, no, I know how you feel. It's tough. We all have to deal with different styles of leadership, right? So in an odd way, just being told I was perhaps too kind in this situation suggested that I wasn't actually particularly nice to them about it. Yeah, nice to them about it. I'm being careful though, because again, if you are too kind, if you are too kind. It's the people who suffer that you're being unkind to, just as much as the person you're not giving constructive feedback to. I always say that it's important to give feedback to people because that's your gift to them. Okay. And you can still do it with humanity. That's the point. It doesn't mean you're harsh or unpleasant, but you can give feedback that says, this went wrong. How can we make sure together that we do better next time? You can use inclusive language, all those kind of things that we've talked about. So I don't think it's an excuse for treating people badly, but I do think that you can be firm, consistent, and transparent about what needs to happen without being unkind. But that doesn't mean being too nice. I do think they're different.
I also think that this is something that the article we're referring to in Harvard Business Review is doing quite well right off the bat. So to me, it answered the evergreen dilemma that many leads have, which is, when do I know when I'm too kind, right? And this is a question that I heard many times. That's something that you and I discussed in the past, and it somehow draws a line in the sand, or in the concrete, I would say, explaining that being too kind, too nice, therefore avoiding tough conversations, avoiding giving feedback, is actually actively hurting someone. So in Pareto's terms, that's the way I'd like to think about it. There's a 20% taking the burden of somebody else's work, and that's in a way because you as a lead did not point out certain cracks in time, right? And this to me somehow sets the conversation and puts it to sleep, because it's really, really clear that there's some things as a lead that you need to take care of. I look at a lead as someone who has a certain responsibility towards their team, towards themselves, and towards the company. So on that, 100%, I believe we're on the same page. But let me close the conversation with a question to you. What do you think is one way for you as a lead to set the tone? So let's say you're new to the company, you're new to the team, you don't want to be regarded as someone that people can walk all over. At the same time, you don't want people to tiptoe around you, but you want to be respected, and you want them to know that you're there for their growth. What are some signals you believe that you should send out as a leader?
That's such a big question, Matteo, but I'll give you a very short answer because I was actually in Cyprus last week at this leaders event where I gave a keynote speech. And I answered the question this way: what is the key to effective leadership? I asked. And the answer I gave was managing your ego. So in some senses, if you are being too nice because you want to be liked, you said you can't be a friend to everybody, right? That's actually not managing your ego, right? Your ego wants to be liked, means you don't make clear expectations of your team. And they expect that of leaders. They expect you to explain what the objective is, what you expect from each of them, how they will be treated if they perform, and so on, right? Clarity, consistency. So if you're being too nice because you want to be, because you want to be liked, that's not managing your own ego. Equally, if you're frightened of being disliked, you're not managing your ego. Leaders, by definition, will be disliked at times. Remember, the foundation of leadership is not about being liked. It's about having a clear vision or direction, explaining to people why it should matter to them, helping them be empowered to do their best work, and giving credit rather than taking credit when things go well, and not blaming them when things go wrong. So examples are that you create these thinking environments that we've talked about. You let everyone be heard in important meetings. You underline the importance of teamwork and collaboration, but you reiterate standards, objectives, how people will be rewarded, how people will discuss it when, standards are not met. All of that can still be done with humanity. So I think you can very early on, by modeling behavior of inclusion as a leader, inclusion being having conversations with people where most people are able to express a view, right, without fearing they're going to be sidelined or undermined. I think you can show that from the very beginning of your role, and people would then recognize that that is an important trait. But you have to also spell it out. Listen, guys, I expect people to behave responsibly, but with respect, even in tough times. I expect people to be comfortable raising difficult topics in front of each other. And I expect us all to be committed to the decisions we make and to be accountable for delivering results. And as long as you're consistent and transparent, right, about how you implement those rules, I think you are aspiring to be at the higher levels of leadership. You're not being too kind and you're not being too nice.
I very much enjoyed the conversation, Costas. Thank you so much. And I hope we can do this again very soon.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Thank you, Matteo.